Have you ever wanted to do something to better yourself? Let me tell you a short story about a friend who decided he was going to stop drinking, and he did it cold turkey. So he stopped going to all the parties and he just stopped drinking completely. And he thought this was going to do something to better his health and to make his life more efficient and better. But this attempt at self-betterment had a dark side that he wasn't ready for. His phone stopped ringing. His friends stopped calling. They stopped coming over and hanging out. And he found himself alone many weekends. And that's when loneliness set in. Today, we're going to dive into why change can feel so lonely and what you can do about it. I'm Chris Hadnaghi, CEO and founder of Social Engineer LLC, the Innocent Lives Foundation, and the Institute for Social Engineering. And this is the Doctor is In episode number 307, I think we're at. And as always, my co-host is Dr. Abbie. Great to have you here, Doc.
Great to be here, Chris. I'm Dr. Abbie Maroño. I'm a behavioral scientist and a behavior analysis expert. I am the Director of Education at Social Engineer, and I specialize in nonverbal communication, trust, and human decision-making.
You know, if you want to hear more of this kind of stuff that we talk about on this podcast, Dr. Abbie and I, not Dr. Abbie and I. Yeah, I'm not her and she's not me. So, but both of us together will be at the Human Behavior Conference in November. I'm really excited about that. If you haven't checked it out, go to humanbehaviorcon.com and look at the lineup we have there. The people that are coming to this conference are just amazing. And the topics of blending influence with information security and teaching people how influence can really help you be more secure in this crazy world where we just see things getting breached and hacked every day. So go check it out. Come see us. And it's November 14th and 15th, and we'll be there with a great lineup of people. And if you like the topic of social engineering, you can jump into our Slack channel. That link is in the show notes. And if you don't have it, just ping Abbie or I on LinkedIn and we'll get it to you. And we also want to invite everyone to go check out innocentlivesfoundation.org. Our mission there is to help stop child predators and people who traffic children. And we've been doing that now for 8 years with over 570 cases completed earthwide. Really proud of the people there. You can help us by donating to our charity. If you want to do that, both Dr. Abbie and I are volunteers there. So be more than happy to have your support. And last but not least, go to clutchmerch.com and give them some love since they opened up their music for our podcast. And of course, we love those guys. Now, Abbie, you have something big happening, don't you?
I do indeed.
And what is it?
I have my book being released on the 10th of June, so it should be out now.
Yes.
And it's called The Upper Hand.
Yeah, so this will come out at the beginning of June. So if you're listening to this, that means you're going to be able to get that book really, really quick. So let's definitely jump on that. It's all about Abbie's influence framework that she developed on her own. And we've been teaching that to law enforcement around the globe at the ICAC events. And you just had some amazing events that you got to teach at a polygraph conference. And you've had some really cool things going on.
So if you are interested in influence and persuasion, my framework was requested and taught through the Secret Service.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool. And you're going to be talking about some of that at the conference too, at Human Behavior Conference.
Yes, I will be.
So there you are, guys. If you get the book, you can have it. You can bring it there. If you don't have it by the time you come in November, we're going to have her books there for sale, so you can get it there. But I say get it, read it, be prepared. You can bring it and have her sign it too. Okay. Now, we already introed that we're talking about why self-betterment can seem lonely at times. Where did this topic come from? Like, why did you want to come up with this topic for the podcast today?
Well, it's one that is personal to me. And it's one that I've seen a lot in people my age. When they're going into the professional field and they're kind of having that transition period between, okay, I'm not a young adult anymore. And maybe I'm having kids or getting married and my life is changing in a really big way. And it's often referred to as the lonely chapter. And I just don't think that it's spoken about enough, how we see self-betterment as all positive. And, you know, you have these big changes in your life and we celebrate them and we should celebrate them. But there is the side effect that often as we transition into new stages in our life, it can be really lonely.
Well, also, that's not just people your age, because I think I've seen it also in my life as I've gone through life with changes. Yeah. So what do you think, knowing that, what triggers the decision to want to change or grow?
Well, it can be anything from life events like leaving a job, ending a relationship, moving to a new place, or just the decision to do the deep inner work to create personal growth. You might just feel stuck and think, you know, I really just I'm not happy with the person that I am, or I want to be something different. And also, sadly, this can be triggered by trauma, because the person that you were before something happened is so fundamentally different that you can't imagine being that same person again. Or on the other side of the spectrum, it can just be a quiet realization that you're stuck in life. Nothing has necessarily happened, but you might just feel stuck in this kind of mundane existence. And all of those things can lead to a decision to change or grow.
Yeah, I actually understand that. Like, I mean, it was 3 years ago that I decided to change my health. And I spent probably, 17 years unhealthy. And it just out of the blue, I just decided one time I need to be different. Right. And it just was like, I could no longer stand who I was at that person. So, and it was a weird time because it was the middle of COVID. So it was a weird time to make a change. Right. But I've often heard people say, and even I know we had a podcast about this, but science says or psychology says that people really don't change. Yeah. That's a common saying. Is that really true?
Yeah, I hear it all the time. People say that people don't change.
Yeah.
And it's a really skeptical view because, yes, people can change and they do, but not always in the way that we imagine, because change isn't usually a dramatic personality swap overnight. It's more of a slow, accumulative process of adaptation, reevaluation, and rewiring the things that happen through reflection, pain, experience. And here's the thing: deliberate effort. We say that people don't change, and it's usually because people don't want to change. But when people really want to change, yes, absolutely, people can change.
You know, it's interesting. I think about this topic and I reflect back 15 years ago when I first started teaching social engineering. My training partner at the time, he came to me after our very first class together and he said, "Chris, you must be exhausted." And I went, "Yeah, man, I am tired." I'm like, "How do you know?" He's like, "Because if I trained like you every day, I would be exhausted." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "You're like an army drill sergeant. You're like commanding. You're like, your voice is stern. You're just barking out orders." And he said, you can't train that way because you're going to exhaust yourself and the class. Now, I wish I could say the next day I was better. Yeah. It took, probably 3-4 years of practice and reminders. Every time I would train, having reminders saying, slow down here, or are you yelling, or are you too stern? And I had to practice things like open ventrals and the nonverbals to soften myself because I was doing this all the time as opposed to open ventrals. And he really worked with me and helped me because it was one of those times where I was like, I don't want to train that way. I know how I like to be taught. And it was the way he was telling me I should be teaching. So that took a while, but that's why I didn't like that statement that people can't change, because I definitely did over the years. And it's not, I can find myself at times under stress falling back into those old habits. Like I can hear it happening, like something going wrong in the class, and I can hear myself like falling back into that. But to change, it took a while, and it's been 15 years now. And now I feel like I can actually train much more like I should have been.
Yeah, and people don't realize just how long it takes. Like you said, it's learning a whole new skill set, and it's also rewiring your reactions to things. So I remember I made a decision to change my life a long time ago. I was just so unhappy with the person that I was. And I didn't just say, okay, this is the kind of person I'm going to be, and then the next day I fit into that category. You really have to actively decide, what is it that I want to change about myself? What is it that I want to model in myself? And then the hard part is you're not there yet. So every time something happens, you're naturally going to respond in the way that you're used to responding. And that's, neurons that fire together, wire together. It's your automatic response system. So to actively stop that response and pick a new one each time is really, really difficult. And it takes a lot of time to unwire those patterns. And for me, what I have found to be really helpful is, so I'm not a religious person, but I have principles that I live by and I write them down. And they're principles that come from me as to how I feel that I should live my life and how I feel I should treat people and treat myself, because they're that active reminder of, okay, is my behavior in line with this? And for me, it's really helpful because if I'm trying to change and trying to grow, naturally I am not there yet. So having that thing I can reflect on, and one of them is don't let anyone get you out of character. So I've chosen how I want to be and how I really want to be. And every time I feel something's pulling me away from that, I go back to that principle of don't let myself slip back into the old version of me because I'm building someone new. And it is an active choice. It's a really hard thing to do. And you have moments where you do fall back into that other person, and naturally you do. But then again, you make a decision, okay, next time I'm going to react this way.
Yeah, I like that because I know for me, when I was trying to make those changes in different parts of my life, it wasn't just psychological. I also had to do some physiological things to help that, right? So like I was saying before, like I still have this habit of like responding too quickly. So one of the things that one of my mentors taught me was, hey, why don't you just slow down when someone says something, especially if it makes you angry, right? Just take a pause, take a breath, think about what you're going to say before you say it. And that might save you a lot of heartache, right? So practicing that really did change response time. Now I might still get angry, right? I might still get angry up there, but now it comes out differently because I take that second pause to be like, okay, how am I going to respond to this? So I think the changes are both psychological, but also physiological in our reactions. And I think maturity helps with it too, a little bit.
It does. And it is really important to highlight when it comes to that loneliness factor, change can be lonely, but it's really growth that is the loneliest, because there is a difference. Not all change is necessarily growth, because change can be external. It can be situational or reactive. Like I said, you move to a new city, new job, circumstances shift, but internally you might be representing the same belief system, same pattern, so the same person. Growth is different. Growth is internal, it's intentional, and it's often deeply uncomfortable. Change can be really fun. Growth is very rarely fun, if I'm honest. It is the hard work because it relates to the way that you see yourself, the way you think, maybe a belief system, maybe you're moving from being religious to not religious, or the other way around. Maybe you're growing confidence, or you're changing your feelings of self-worth, your relationship with yourself. All of these things are a type of change, but not all change equals growth. And psychologically speaking, growth involves change in things like core beliefs. Emotional regulation is a really big one. Self-concepts are how you see yourself. Maybe you no longer tolerate certain kinds of relationships. Maybe you're craving more solitude. All of these kinds of things, if you really think about them, they're shifts in your identity. So that can be really, really uncomfortable. And that comes with such a deeper level of loneliness than just change. Change isn't necessarily a lonely thing, but growth typically can be.
Okay, so let's discuss some of the reasons why it can feel so lonely. Maybe because now that you identified that, there's got to be some reasons why this type of growth would be lonely.
Yeah. So think about your old relationships. They're built on your old identity. So your friendships, routines, maybe even your role in your family, they all rest on this kind of mutual unspoken agreement of who you are. And once you start changing, maybe you're becoming more assertive and the people around you are used to you being more of a pushover. Maybe you're more self-reflective, or maybe you have stronger boundaries. You're more driven. You're more career focused. All of these things can strain those relationships, and they're not necessarily helping you become the person that you're trying to be. So you may find yourself pulling away or even being pushed out, and not necessarily out of malice, but your growth may disrupt those systems. Those systems are really familiar. And that dynamic now, where you were this certain kind of person, it's now starting to shift. And this is called identity dissonance. So when the self that you're becoming no longer aligns with these social scripts you've been following. And obviously there can be things like jealousy and bitterness too. If you are in certain groups and you start moving in one direction and you start to grow, other people might see you as kind of outgrowing them, and it can lead to some negative social interactions.
Yeah, I remember when I was much younger, when I was like in my teens, we had this friend group, really close group, and we hung out every night, parking lot skateboarding, just that was our thing. We had this one friend.
So random.
Well, that's what we would do. That was our fun. And we had this one friend that started dating this girl, and she didn't like our group. She didn't like us at all. She kind of hated us. We were all like ruffians, She didn't really she didn't want him being with us. All of a sudden, like, he wasn't there anymore. Like, and then it happened. We stopped calling him. We stopped inviting him. We stopped hanging out with him,
Yeah.
And it was sad, but it was like that change in his life, or that growth part of his life, probably saved him a lot of trouble, because we got in a lot of trouble. But I mean, but that growth part, and now we are still friends. Like, we're still friends. We see each other once in a while and we're friendly, but we're not the way we were then. Like, we could hang out for 6 hours straight and talk and laugh and all that kind of stuff. We might have like a 15-minute conversation, now if we see each other, but it's not like we don't like each other. It's just that changed everything. It changed our whole dynamic as a friend group.
Yeah. And this can happen in relationships too. So you can have, and this is one of the really hard truths when it comes to things like love. You can be involved with one person where you're both certain versions of yourself. And then as time goes on, you can grow and change. And maybe this version of you now just doesn't really align with that version of them now. And it can be a really hard truth to accept, that sometimes people do change. And often they change in ways that are so fundamental that there's such a divide now. Say it's your belief system or your moral compass, something that is really foundational to how you interact with the world and your relationships. And I know my moral belief system has changed over the years, and it has made me interact with people very differently. And it has made me accept very different kinds of people into my life. And if that's happening when you're in a relationship, it can cause real friction, and it might be unhealthy. Now, if your belief systems are so contradictory and they have changed so much, and one person's gone through that kind of shedding of an old identity, it might mean you're just not right for each other anymore. And then there's also the factor of you haven't found your new people yet, because we're not talking about people who have made it to that identity yet. I don't believe we ever fully make it, which is why I called my first book Work in Progress, because we're always a work in progress. We're always in that transition phase, but we do have periods of our life where we are more settled and we can be happy with who we are. We still know, okay, there's room for growth, but generally I'm very happy with who I am. We're talking here about that transition phase where you're still finding it, where it's still that discovery phase. And in this phase, especially, you've shed those environments and patterns, maybe sometimes entire communities, but your nervous system hasn't yet adapted to trust unfamiliar social spaces. And new circles, they require different kinds of emotional bandwidth. They require different kinds of vulnerability and a tolerance for uncertainty. And this transitional space between familiar and unknown, it's kind of like you're floating in limbo and you haven't yet found your space. You haven't yet found those people. And I remember this when I was in my PhD. When I was doing my PhD, I thought, okay, this is everything I've ever wanted. I'm going to find my people. There's going to be people like me. And when I did it, I was expecting everyone to have the same kind of drive I did and the same thoughts I did. And, I'm not someone that likes to go out. I'm not a party girl. I think I'm pretty boring. Like, I like what I like. And when I went to university, I thought that that's what the PhD community would be like. And I actually found it really difficult to find people that liked the same stuff I did and didn't want to go out and didn't want to do certain things. And I just felt very alone. And then when I went into academia, I thought that was the kind of person that I was. And I felt even more alone as a professor. And I realized I just didn't fit that space. And it was only when I shed all of that and realized what I thought I wanted for my life, being this academic as a full-time professor. And that was my whole dream. It didn't fit who I was. And I had to change all of that. And then I moved to the private sector, moved to America. And I'm like, oh, now I found my people. Now I found where I fit and where I'm happy. But all of that time, I kept looking for my people that felt like me. And it's a really uncomfortable space to be in. And often that's most of the time when it comes to growth. And then when you do find those people, they're often really pivotal in helping you feel comfortable in that new identity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I had similar when we moved as a family from Pennsylvania to Venice, Florida. I had no physical activity in my life. I mean, I read books, listened to music. That's what I did. When I moved down there, everybody was surfing, skateboarding, running on the beach. I didn't fit in anywhere. It took me a bit to finally get invited even to one of these beach parties where everyone was surfing and to find new people. And I had to do some things that were really uncomfortable. Like I had to paddle out into the ocean on giant waves and almost die, right? I had no clue what I was doing. I barely swam when I was up north, let alone go out into the ocean with waves and sharks and crap. But I had to learn. I said, if I want this group to accept me, I'm going to have to change who I am. I'm going to have to become a different person. I eventually fell in love with it. You know, it became my whole new identity and lifestyle, but it took a bit, and it was really scary. And I think, you know, what you have here is our third point. Like that disconnect, it felt dangerous at times because to reconnect, I had to do dangerous things.
Yeah. And there's a couple points there. One I want to come back to that you said about you had to decide, you know, you had to make the choice of this is who I am, because there's two more things. One is that part of the brain, the same part of the brain that processes physical pain, the anterior cingulate cortex, it also lights up when we have social exclusion. So it feels painful when we're excluded. So when you're disconnected from your community, even when you've chosen to, you've said, this is the right thing for me. And I knew that when I was removing myself, you know, even when it comes from family, I am completely disconnected from my mum. And even though that was my choice, it still physically hurts because it still is registered in the brain like physical pain. So even if you're growing in a healthy direction, your body does interpret that as danger and abandonment. And then that other point you made about choosing to do the things that you need to do to connect with people, that's a really important one because your self-concept is in flux. So your identity is not certain at this point, and it makes it harder to relate to others because you're still figuring out who you are. So how do you know who your people are if you don't really know who you are? And I call this the who am I now phase, because you're questioning, what do I want? What do I like? Who am I? Am I too much? Am I not enough? What identity do I want to create? How do I find confidence? How do I not get arrogant? How do I be humble? All of these things you might be battling, and it's your internal compass. It's recalibrating. So it's really hard to feel anchored, and it's hard to connect with people when you're in that phase. And the way that I think about it is, like, if you don't know who you are, say you're free diving, and as you go down, you have a tether. And your tether is your self-concept. So as you go afar, you hold on to your tether, you know you can always find your way back. That tether is your self-identity. What if you let it go? You're just kind of floating. And that's how it can feel sometimes. It's like, I'm not anchored. I don't know my way back because I've let go of my tether and I'm just out here trying to find my way. And it can feel like you're almost like lost in the ocean. And it's this really empty feeling sometimes. And what you can do about it is, like you said, okay, I'm going to decide to make a change. And maybe this is uncomfortable, but I know that this is part of who I want. We've not yet said who I want to be, but, you know, part of who I want to be is, in your example, I want to be healthier. You know, I want to be more active. So you go to those community spaces that encourage that kind of person so that you can start to develop that part of your self-concept and start to connect with people who at least embody some traits that you know that you're looking for.
It's funny when I got my first trainer he said, one of the things you may have to do until this becomes a habit is stop hanging out with friends that encourage you to do the unhealthy thing. Like, let's go get 3 pizzas. Let's eat, a dozen wings. Let's go, have all this nasty food that's not going to help you with your goal. And at first I'm like, no, I don't need to do that. And then it hit me like I'm hanging out with these friends and I'm like, yeah, I can't stop being unhealthy if I don't change until it becomes a habit. Now it doesn't matter. I'm in the habit in a way that that change is fully effect. But at first he was right. I had to.
100%. And there's some really interesting research because we know that we become like the people that we hang out with. We know that we become like, they say, your 5 closest friends. And I always say my standards for people in my life are not just people I like, but people I want to be like. And there's some really interesting research because the microbiome is so central to how we function. It affects our health. It affects our cognition. Most of our serotonin is made in the gut. It affects our mental health, cortisol levels, all of it. When we hang out with people often and in close quarters, our microbiome and theirs somehow become more in sync. And it's not fully understood quite how they become more in sync. But we also know things like, and this makes sense because if you're a female and you hang out with another female very often, your periods become in sync. So we know there is a biological syncing when you are in close quarters to someone. So it does actually make sense that, that would have an effect on the microbiome. So think about it. If that's having an effect on your actual health, and well-being, we know the microbiome is so core to how we function. The way you surround yourself with different friends is affecting your physical health in that way. So if you are around people that aren't healthy, aren't emotionally regulated, you're likely to pick up on some of those traits. I remember I had a friendship last year, and I ended up removing myself from that friendship because I didn't quite realize the way that it was affecting me. She was not very emotionally regulated, and she was what we call a mean girl. And my role in the friendship was always to kind of talk her down and talk her out and help her regulate. And I didn't realize until I removed myself from it that I was waking up with anxiety every day. And I was stressed and I couldn't figure out why I was so anxious. And then when I separated myself, it was like the anxiety went away. And I realized I was carrying her emotional dysregulation into my own life. And that's what we do. And that's why it's so important when you are in that phase of growth to choose the people around you selectively. And again, it can lead to loneliness because you might not have met those people yet.
Yeah. And I like the point that you said about constantly being in flux because I look at the things that I'm interested in now. And there's some core things, like I still love chess, I still love the ocean. Those things have been there since I was young. But some of the things that I find enjoyable now are because of the friends that I have. Not things that I ever said I'm going to go do that when I grow up. Right. And it's interesting when you look at that because if you asked 25-year-old me, I would have never told you what 50-year-old me would be doing. Right. That would be not even a thought in my head. So you look at that, you're like, wow, how much has life changed? Because of the friends that I have and the choices I've made.
And I think that's a really important message for people who are in that phase, because our emotions can make us feel like it's never going to change. When you have that feeling of loneliness, it feels so all-consuming. And it's hard to imagine never feeling that and it going away, even if you objectively know, because it feels so overwhelming. It feels like it won't go away. And I had a moment the other day, I think either the day before yesterday, actually, I put my certificate on the wall from the Secret Service and I called my dad and he said, "How do you feel?" And I should have felt really excited. And I just said, "I feel really lonely," because I looked at my wall of achievements and things I had done. And I was like, I did it alone. And I was telling my friend at the gym that. And I said to him, I just felt like I did it alone. And he held my hand and he said, "But you're not alone." And then I realized, no, I'm not alone anymore. And this life I have now, I'm surrounded by so many people that feel like family. And it takes those moments. And I had to step back and I reflected, you're right, I'm kind of out of that phase now. And I'm actually in this phase in my life that is outside of the lonely period. And I'm connected to people and I found my people. And it does feel like it's never going to end. And sometimes you also don't realize when you've come out of it. And that was the lesson for me there, because I still almost saw myself as being in the lonely chapter. And it was only when he said, but you're not alone. And I had to actively step back and think, yeah, I'm not. And that was a moment for me where it's like I kind of put that chapter to the side.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. So let's say someone's listening to this and they're going through that phase.
Yeah.
What should they do about it?
There's an incredible book. Most of us have probably heard of it, called Man's Search for Meaning. And it's written by Frankl, a Holocaust survivor. And he proposed that suffering ceases to be suffering the moment it finds meaning. And it's not the pain itself, but our interpretation of it and our ability to place it in a meaningful context that shapes whether we're broken or strengthened by it. And I think this is really relevant to personal growth, because we find ourselves in these spaces between versions of ourselves. We're no longer who we were. We're not fully who we're becoming yet. And it can feel that empty, painful loneliness. And when we feel this discomfort, we can give it a meaning, because meaning doesn't remove the pain, but it does give it a direction. So we can say, okay, let's give myself some meaning. Let me stop free diving. Let me try and find a tether. And we can ground ourselves by creating anchors, things like rituals that remind us who we are. When everything else feels uncertain, maybe it's a morning walk. Maybe it's a notebook by the side of the bed, a voice note to a friend, small acts that kind of keep us steady. For me, it was creating those principles that I live by. So when I do feel in flux, I have something that is kind of like an anchor to ground me. And everybody's might be different. Just something that makes you feel a little bit grounded, because again, that loneliness, it can feel so disorientating. And sometimes it can be really overwhelming. And we know what humans do when they get overwhelmed. Often they go a little bit wild and just go in that direction. You know, you spill a little bit of your drink and you don't pour the whole drink on the counter. Yeah. But we do one thing and we feel in flux and we're like, well, I might as well just ruin everything in my life.
Burn it all down.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But making an effort to reconnect is an important one. And you mentioned that earlier, because oxytocin, which is called often referred to as the bonding hormone, increases when we form new social ties, even when they're weak connections. So even if we don't yet know who our people are, trying to make an effort to reconnect, even if it's just simple, pleasant interactions, those little things, they can reinforce connection. So you don't feel completely alone. Maybe you haven't yet got super close relationships, but it's a step in the right direction of starting to just feel more connected to people.
Well, as always, an excellent topic that I think will be very useful for many people listening. I think all of us go through this once in a while, and maybe often through our life without knowing. You know, I think especially in the earlier years of life, it's hard to know all of these little things that you brought out here today. Yeah. And it may feel, when you blend all of those life changes with growth and then maybe with childhood trauma, oof, now it does feel like just burn the whole thing down, right? So I think it's a really important topic for people to take note in. So thanks for doing all the research. As always, you have like a ton of references here that we'll put into the show notes so people can go and read the things that we use to develop this. And next month, what are we talking about next month?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, I have written down, it's love at first sight.
Oh, okay. Because I remember Amanda was going to put in a guest.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think that's what I have written down, that we're going to discuss that. I think it's a really interesting one. I always love these little weird topics where it's like, okay, let's see what comes out of it, you know?
Yep.
How that happens.
Yep. And we already gave a little bit of a clue that I'm going to ruin some of it. I already ruined some of it in this episode. So I'm going to destroy some Disney fantasies.
Oh, no. So if you're a fan of Disney fantasies, you should still come listen. Yeah, you should. It'll be interesting. You know, you love learning, so you got to come listen to these episodes. Well, thanks again, Doc. Really interesting one. And it feels like a free bonus therapy session every time we do one of these. So I'm going to go burn something down now and pour my drink out all over the place. I hope you guys enjoyed listening to this episode as much as Abbie and I enjoyed filming it and recording it. And stay safe until next month. Go reconnect with someone, and we'll see you then. Bye.